My stepfather ruined my life because he thought my stepbrother deserved to be with my fiancée more than I did. My father passed away when I was 15. At that time, he and my mom were no longer particularly close, so while it was a heavy blow for me, she didn't seem as affected as one might expect. When I turned 17, I joined the army. During my first year away from home, my mom remarried. My relationship with her new husband was not great, we just had different personalities. He often made sarcastic remarks and told me to be a man whenever I complained about something unpleasant. This led to arguments between us, and I was just as much to blame as he was, though nothing serious ever came of it. I was discharged from the army for medical reasons after nearly 5 years of service. My mom and stepfather said they'd be happy if I temporarily stayed with them. I told them it would only be until I found a job and got back on my feet. I even offered to pay rent, but they refused. However, 3 days after I moved in, my stepfather, when we were alone, asked me what I thought would be a fair rent. I was confused, but since it was his house, I agreed on an amount and didn't mention it to my mom, assuming he didn't want her to know since he never brought it up in her presence. I never asked them for anything because I wanted to handle everything myself. My stepfather had a son from a previous marriage. We had no shared interests, but we never had any issues either. I would say we got along fine. The only thing that bothered me was that my stepfather and mom helped him with everything. They paid for his education, his car, his housing during college, and even afterward. I was only a few months older than him, so he started college right after their wedding. As I said, I never needed their help, but it stung that he was given everything while I was immediately asked to pay rent. Still, I didn't hold a grudge. I moved out after 3 months, and soon after, I met a girl I was completely captivated by. We started dating. It was my first relationship, and I was on cloud 9. You know that feeling at the beginning of a relationship that just doesn't fade? I was terrified to introduce her to my mom. We were very close, and I was afraid she would be overly critical of the girl I brought home. However, my fears were unfounded. They got along great. My girlfriend barely had any family, which is a long story, so my mom and stepfather became like family to her. She and my mom became so close that they sometimes spent time together without me, and I was thrilled about it. My stepfather also really liked my girlfriend, and I felt like it brought us closer together, though I never thought I wanted that. About a year into our relationship, I realized she was the one I wanted to marry. I told my mom and stepfather, and they both seemed very happy. She was already practically part of the family. My mom gave me her engagement ring, which my father had given her. My job didn't pay much, so I decided that even if this ring wasn't permanent, it would be a great temporary option. When I proposed, my girlfriend said the ring was not temporary at all. She loved it. I had never been happier in my life. We started planning the wedding, and my mom and stepfather offered to help with the finances. It was the first time they had ever offered me financial help, and it meant a lot to me. About 3 months later, my stepfather called me and said I needed to come over. It seemed odd, but after work, I went. When I arrived, my mom, stepfather, stepbrother, and fiancé were there. She was sitting on the couch, visibly crying. My first thought was that someone had died. I tried to sit next to her, but my stepfather stopped me. Then he accused me of cheating on my fiancé throughout our relationship. I was utterly confused and told everyone that I didn't even text other women unless they were family. Apparently, some girl got my fiancé's number and told her we had been sleeping together for over a year. She didn't even know I was in a relationship. She sent my fiancé screenshots of messages and knew things about me that a random stranger couldn't have known. I was completely blindsided. I handed my phone over right then and there, saying she could check it herself to see that I had done nothing. My fiancé and my mom were both crying. I started crying too. My stepfather called me every name in the book and threw me out of the house, saying he would call the police if I ever set foot there again. In the following weeks, I desperately tried to contact my fiancé, calls, messages, voicemails, everything, but got no response. Then, after weeks of silence, my stepfather called and told me to stop trying to contact her and that I would never be welcome in their family again. I tried reaching out to my mom, but she ignored me too. About a month later, the only thing I received was a text from her saying how sad and disappointed she was. My mom had almost no other relatives, So she spent holidays with my stepfather's family. They all turned their backs on me too. I saw their Christmas photos on Facebook. My ex-fiancé looked happy and at peace, and it shattered me. The only people who still spoke to me were my uncle, my father's brother, and his family, though even they seemed cautious. My uncle was the only one who truly believed me. Honestly, I don't know how I would have coped without him. About 6 months later, I moved to California, trying to escape it all. About a year after that, I got a call from a number in my home state, a rare occurrence by then. I answered, and it was my stepbrother. I immediately hung up. He called again, but I ignored it. It stuck in my mind all day. I decided that if he called again, I would answer. That evening, he called again. The conversation was awkward, to say the least. He told me my ex-fiancée had been in a deep depression for a long time. It took her almost a year to even consider dating again. I hadn't dated anyone at all in that time. A few months ago, my stepfather convinced my stepbrother to ask her out. He did, but nothing really came of it. When he told my stepfather, he replied, "I didn't get rid of your brother for nothing. She's a great girl, you need to be with her." I nearly collapsed from shock. That feeling quickly turned to rage. Turns out, my stepfather had hired that woman. I still don't know who she was. He faked the screenshots and gave them to her so she could send them to my fiancé. My stepbrother said that a month ago, my stepfather admitted everything to him. He didn't know what to do with this information, but it was weighing on him so much that he finally decided to tell me. The next day, he told my mom and my ex-fiancé the truth. He also said he wanted me to be prepared in case they reached out to me. This happened last Tuesday. Today, I texted my stepbrother that I was ready to talk to them if they wanted. I have no idea what I will say. Honestly, I expect a lot of tears and apologies. I don't know if I'm ready to forgive anyone. 4 days have passed. This morning, my stepbrother called me and told me everything that had happened over the past week. It turns out that what my stepfather admitted to my stepbrother wasn't exactly what my stepbrother told me. My stepfather had been very careful with his words enough to heavily imply what he had done, but never explicitly confess. Here's what I've learned about my stepbrother. He's a lot smarter than me. Instead of immediately confronting my mom and my ex-fiancé or getting into a fight with his father, he took a different approach I never would have thought of. He somehow gained access to my ex-fiancée's phone records and tracked down the woman who had called her. He told me it took him forever to find her. When he finally did, he called her and convinced her to meet him in a public place. That's when everything unraveled. It turns out my stepfather had met this woman on Tinder, which, to me, is clear evidence that he was cheating on my mom. This made me even angrier for obvious reasons. The woman claims they never had a physical relationship, but at this point, I don't care. What does matter is that my stepbrother confronted her, pressured her with the full story, and told her about everything that had happened. For context, she definitely knew what she was doing. Maybe time and the weight of what had happened finally made her feel guilty, but I don't care. She admitted that she had been paid $1,000 for a single phone call. That was the deal. She was given a script, provided with fabricated proof in the form of screenshots, and instructed to call my fiancé and convince her we had been together. That was her entire role. My stepbrother then begged her to tell the truth to my mom and my ex-fiancé. He even offered to pay her again to do it. She agreed but said she'd do it for free. This meeting happened yesterday while my stepfather was out of town for work. Only 4 people were present: my mom, my ex-fiancé, my stepbrother, and the woman. According to my stepbrother, the moment she started telling the truth, all 3 women burst into tears. After she finished, my stepbrother told them that I was living in California and that he would contact me when I was ready to hear from them. That was before I texted him. Now, a little background about my mom and my ex-fiancé to help explain why I think they reacted the way they did. After my father died, my mom and I became inseparable. We were each other's support system. When I was 16, I picked up some bad habits to try and cope with my emotions. I had promised my mom we'd spend New Year's Eve together, but instead, I got drunk with my friends and left her alone. She sent me a message that night, telling me how sad and lonely she felt. From that moment on, our relationship was never the same. I felt absolutely horrible about it, and ever since that day, I tried my best to turn my life around until my stepfather destroyed everything. My mom is the kind of person who can't stand being alone. I think when her love with my dad started fading, she replaced that emptiness with me. And when I grew up and moved out, she filled that void with my stepfather. As for my ex-fiancée, like I said before, she barely had any family. This made her severely distrustful of people, and her past relationships, which were far from happy, only made it worse. Still, she never spoke badly about her exes, which I always respected. The only exception was one abusive ex. Despite my extreme shyness, I often heard that I was cute, especially from younger girls. I never liked that label because it didn't sound very masculine. But over time, I accepted it and learned to appreciate my boyish face and how easily I blushed. My ex-fiancée was almost 3 years older than me. I've always been more attracted to older women and never paid much attention to younger ones, even when they showed interest in me. But that didn't stop them from flirting, and it really upset my ex. She often asked, "Why don't you want them? Why don't you leave me for someone younger and prettier?" But I always reassured her that I only wanted her. I hope this helps you understand why I think my mom and my ex believed the lies so easily. Again, this is not an excuse for what they did. I can't say I truly understand them. At the end of my call with my stepbrother, he said my mom and my ex wanted to call me today. I agreed. I sat and waited. By 3 p.m., I started getting anxious. I even wondered if my stepbrother had made the whole thing up just to mess with me. Then he texted me. "Are you okay?" I replied, "Yeah. Are they actually going to call me today?" He said, "They've been trying to reach you for the last few hours." That's when I remembered I had blocked both of them when I moved, and I completely forgot about it. I never blocked my stepbrother, and honestly, I have no idea why, but I'm glad I didn't. I unblocked their numbers. 10 minutes later, my mom called. The first thing she said was, "You sound different." I almost hung up right then and there. It took every ounce of self-control to simply say, "Yeah." She immediately burst into tears. I thought I'd feel something, maybe relief, maybe anger, but I felt nothing. She asked if I had received any of her messages. I said no. Apparently, she had been texting me all year without realizing she was blocked. I told her that if she really wanted to contact me, she would have found a way. Maybe that sounds harsh, but I know it's true. I told her that I was willing to try and rebuild a relationship with her, but it would take time. She was overjoyed. She also told me she was leaving my stepfather. She was packing up her things and was going to file for divorce immediately. I believe her. She may have been a terrible mother in my eyes, but she's never done things halfway. I would pay good money to see that bastard's face when he comes home to an empty house. Then, my ex-fiancée took the phone. Her apologies were just as tearful as my mom's. With her, I felt something. I even tried to remind her how many times I told her I would never do something like that to her. How much I loved her. She was horrified. And honestly, that felt good. We talked for about 30 minutes, and it was a nice conversation. I had spent a whole year telling myself this would never happen. But then, I thought maybe we still have a chance. She said she still had the engagement ring. That pissed me off. I told her to give it to my mom because it belonged to neither of us anymore. She was visibly upset, and honestly, I wanted her to be. She asked if she could text or call me. I told her yes, but not to expect fast replies. I gave her the same ultimatum I gave my mom. They would have to earn my trust back. The odds of us getting back together? Extremely low. She said she understood. A month has passed. Sorry for the delay, I've been busy with work and just got back home last weekend. I spent a long time thinking about that text message, and as it turns out, it was from my stepfather. Curiosity got the better of me, and I called him back. I took advice from some people and recorded the conversation using an app. Unfortunately, I can't say I got much out of it. The moment I heard his voice, I felt physically sick. He asked how I was doing. I told him to cut the crap. He just laughed. Of course, he never said anything outright incriminating. He kept it vague, kept himself in the clear. But I did ask him one thing: why? Why couldn't he accept that my fiancée and I were happy together? His response: "You were never man enough for a woman like her. She would have been wasted on you." His views on relationships are very traditional, which is ironic, considering he clearly never understood my ex or our relationship. Without getting into too many details, my ex-fiancée was never one to follow gender norms. She has a high-paying job and once told me she could never be a stay-at-home wife. She took the lead in many aspects of our relationship. It was obvious she never understood her at all. So what was the point of that call? I still don't know. At the end, I told him never to call me again and hung up. Last week, I flew back home for my uncle's 60th birthday. My family welcomed me warmly, expressing regret for not believing in me earlier. To be fair, none of them were outright cruel to me. I don't hold any grudges against them. I met up with my stepbrother at his place. My mom and ex-fiancé were also there. I got exactly what I expected: tears and apologies. I had individual conversations with each of them. My mom already filed for divorce. We had a real conversation. Things between us are still tense, but I think we're moving towards some kind of healing. My stepbrother apologized for everything. He clearly feels guilty about what happened. I told him I don't blame him. My ex-fiancé, we talked all night. We had already been talking over the phone for a few weeks, but this was the first time we had seen each other in over a year. At first, we just caught up on life. Then, we got serious. We talked about everything that happened, how much it destroyed me, how broken I was. She told me she had started seeing a therapist and asked if I would go to a session with her. I agreed. To be honest, she's done more for me in the last few weeks than I could have ever asked. The therapy session was good for both of us. Afterward, I asked her if she wanted to go out with me on Saturday night. She agreed. The date went really well. We had a great evening together. Dinner, arcade game, something we used to do a lot when we were together. This was my first date in nearly a year and a half, and honestly, I enjoyed it. Afterward, we went back to her place and talked some more. Before I left, we agreed to discuss our next steps before I flew back to California. A lot of people have asked for another update, so here's where things stand. I have regular communication with my mom. We are rebuilding our relationship, and there's definite progress. I'm honestly glad to have her back in my life, even though it will take time for things to feel normal again. As for my ex-fiancée, she flew out to visit me. It was nice. Right now, we are not back together, and I think that's for the best. As for my former stepfather, I have no idea what's going on with him. He tried to contact my mom several times after she left, but he never got through to her. He has not tried to reach out to me again, and I hope he never does. I never want to see that man again. Life has changed. In the end, I moved again for a new job. Now, I live a few states away from my family, and I think that's good for everyone. It's been a long road, but I'm finally starting to feel like myself again. Thank you to everyone who supported me through this. If anything significant happens, I'll post another update. But for now, this is the end of my story.